hear about it when we're there. Yeah. To get some updates. So where's, oh yeah, Brooke said she couldn't come for the last 2 classes, that's right. And who else should be here? Kirsty, where's Kirsty?
Is she at practicum right now?
I don't know, I thought she was done.
Ooh, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, why don't we get Liam to tell us about
Oh, yeah, no, so we got their Tuesday conference for us started on the Wednesday.
So who was all there?
So myself, Jenna, David, Adriana, Nicole, our supervisor, Close Read, I think, Tally, so there was 5 of them. We all presented. So David did the 20-minute oral, and then the rest of us, so Adriana, Tally, Jenna, and I did the 10-minute rapid oral. And
cool.
yeah, so that was good. That was the first time having done. That was kind of our first transition.
Did you get photos and stuff?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah, we got photos.
Cool. Yeah.
So okay, yeah, I can share those with you. So
we can post them on Twitter.
Perfect. So we had done that, and that was probably our first kind of attempt. So most of us, except for Adriana, I'm sure Adriana had done different oral presentations, but for us in our masters, that's what we are. First transition from poster presentations to actually presenting to the audience, and that went well. Jen and I are both actually finishing up, so that was our first attempt at kind of defending our work, because Jen's defense is on the 17th, and I'm on the 26th of June, so it's kind of our first go, but realized how fast. I think Nicole had it down, or they had like set out for the guidelines 5 minutes, and then like that question and answer, so 5 minutes to present a thesis was really not awesome. It felt like you just like barely skimmed through this. Yeah, and otherwise like a lot of like a lot of mixed methods, a lot of qualitative work being presented there. Arranged, there was a bit of a setup for Capo in Banff for 2019 coming up, so talking about that, and for the relevance to kind of our lab, just introducing an entire stream specific for the physical activity.
Yeah, there's a special interest group, right?
Yeah. So doing that, what else am I missing?
So what of the other presentations that people gave stood out for you in terms of stuff we've been talking about? You know, the patient engagement or the knowledge translation or whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. Like the best ones that came about was honestly kind of the most profound speakers tend to be the ones who kind of have gone through it, and like there was a speaker and they've gone through the experience and now they're into the field of research, so they're presenting and they usually introduce themselves with why they're doing this type of research, and there was some profound stories that had come about, and so that was like kind of connecting to that patient oriented research and like any of those, and it was neat where I feel like different from some of the other conferences and how strong that piece is, and it really enlightens the numbers. Like, so when you're able to present the data on a lot of that quantitative pieces, but being able to support that through anyone that was doing some of that interviews, bringing about that, it just shared and much more brought that, I don't know, some of those, it just made it a little bit more relevant in that immediate sense when you hear it, when you're connecting the two.
Yeah, so really being patient focused.
Yeah, huge, yeah, so lots of it.
Capo's making a move to get their conference, what do they call it? There's like a term, like patient, I can't remember what it is, not patient involved, but
yeah,
do you remember?
Patient,
I don't know, but in order to meet this criteria, to call yourself patient engaged or whatever it is, you have to have patients involved from every single stage, like on the planning committee and on the board, and give a certain proportion of the attendees, and the presentations all have to be patient focused and stuff. So Capo's working, they've now got a couple patients on their board, and they're working towards, although I'm the chair of the scientific committee for the 2019 conference, I'm like, I don't know if we can do it by then, right? Like we already have a steering committee, but they're trying to get that designation for the 2019 conference in Banff.
Yeah, no, it was neat. So it was like, yeah.
And there was a panel or something, she said, on patient engagement of some sort. I don't know if you saw that.
No, I think I had missed that one, because I submitted my thesis. It was a little bit juggling submitting my thesis to my examining committee because that had to be done on the Friday, so I was juggling all the balls.
Yeah, they had some kind of panel talking about patient engagement, and it was, I don't know if it was a couple of patients and, you know, some board members, I think, from Capo who were on the panel and talking about that. Anyway, it sounded like it was good, but then it was a bit controversial because some patient got up in the audience and said something like, you know, but healthcare professionals don't really understand, you have to be a patient and,
Yeah, there was a bit of that underlying tone, and I feel like that's a little bit the balance to strike, is to make those two worlds, like, as much as it's a pretty rainbow picture to
Yeah.
include it all, but the logistics of actually, and there was a little bit that I do remember even just kind of feeling that throughout it, having sometimes just the finger being pointed, like, and a little bit kind of having this like patient oriented, but then I feel like there's a couple moments where it was treading a little bit towards like throwing some of these healthcare providers under the bus and being like, and so it's like, realizing the phenomenal job that they're doing in their work, and then realizing this is super important, but sometimes it was like, you got this sense where like, there's very like, and probably with some like, good reasons behind it, but at times almost treading that line, being like, it's against the healthcare providers rather than making it like a bit more of a kind of working together collaboration between the two. So I found that, which I didn't expect. That was my first introduction to that, because I've read and we talk about that in a sense, and you're like, oh, that sounds awesome, and then all of a sudden
you see how
you really see it, and then you kind of see how sometimes the patients don't really want, like, they're resentful towards the healthcare professionals. So then it's this world of like, ooh.
Yeah, and then the healthcare provider's afraid to say anything, right?
Yeah,
Because it might take it the wrong way, or
yeah,
but yeah. So I'd heard that there was some question or comment from a patient in the audience about healthcare providers can't really know what it feels like, but how many healthcare providers have had cancer in their family, right?
Yeah.
They're caregivers too. How many of them have had cancer themselves,
yeah,
right? The president of CAPO, their mother died of cancer. It's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
I think the line between professional and patient, caregiver is very fine line, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, the patients think that they're unique maybe, and true, they have a unique perspective, but healthcare providers are people too,
Yeah, that was the one thing that was like, especially with like David being in that field. I know there's a couple moments where he was like, ooh, like he felt a little bit targeted.
Oh, because
being
the
a
medical
physician.
professionals, right? Yeah, because everyone likes to beat up on them.
Totally,
They're
yeah.
not the
So
oncologist, they don't know.
exactly, they don't even acknowledge my number to them, and he's like, ugh, like, so it was interesting actually being there with him. So we attended a lot of it together, and there was definitely moments where he's like, ooh, like,
Sort of hiding.
yeah, yeah. So that was, it was interesting.
Yeah, I think so. You have to really, when you are bringing all these worlds together, be especially aware of being respectful, right, of everybody's perspective.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
So, Rosie?
Yeah, so I went to IBTN, so International Behavioural Trials Network Conference, which is the first time I've gone to that conference.
It's pretty new too. So.
Yeah, it's only like the second one that's actually called IBTN, isn't it?
Yeah,
And it's
or
been
third.
like something else
Yeah,
before
exactly.
that. And it's once every 2 years as well, which I only found out.
Every 2 years in Montreal,
Oh.
but it's every year, so it's in Montpellier next year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought it was every years. Yeah, so I just wrote a couple of notes. So the conference itself was great. I'm like really into methodological rigor, but not as applied to behavioural interventions previously, like before this. Just as in application to like exercise physiology specifically, which is what I was doing during my PhD. So it was really nice to have like the people that have basically committed to methodological rigor, but in the sense of behavioural interventions, because that's just like naturally I loved it sort of thing. So like it was really a sense of everyone that was there. It felt like they were making a commitment not only to trying to improve the standard of the methodology and behavioural interventions first of all, but also helping everyone else do that, so the less senior people. So I found like the senior people that were there were really helpful to the younger or the early career researchers or the young researchers.
There are some conferences where the senior ones are kind of pooh-poohing to the junior people.
Yeah,
They don't want to bother with them, right?
I
Like
didn't
they just
feel
want to hang
it
out with their
like
cronies.
So there was one like workshop session in particular where it was just the nuts and bolts of behavioural interventions, and it was Ken Friedland, Linda Powell, and the other Linda.
Lynn Collins.
No, sorry, Linda
was,
Powell
Susan.
and Susan. Yeah.
Correct.
And that one.
Tchaikovsky.
Tchaikovsky.
Yeah, that one was great. That was really good.
I mean, and those guys literally wrote the book, right?
Yeah, exactly. And they one of the things they were talking about a new book, I think, and I don't usually have books, but as in for research, because you just move to journal articles, don't you? But I actually really want that book, so that's quite good. And I was also, I know this isn't really about behavioural trials, but I was really impressed with the gender balance, which is something that's really important to me. So to see myself like represented, especially when you guys did the panel, of the like the 4 women that were talking about optimization, was it? Or
Yeah, it was methodology.
methodology in
Yeah,
general.
there's pilot studies and there
Yeah,
was
so the orbit
most-
model type
yeah.
things. Yeah, that was great. Some of the other things I wrote that like stood out to me. So Linda Powell was the first person that sort of gave a session, and she said that about having, if you want to influence sort of policy, then you need to have the same level of evidence as you have in phase 3 multi-centre RCTs. And even though that's not always the right methodology, you know, if you can't begin there, that was quite like, I found that quite interesting that you actually, this is the same level of evidence that would be required for a drug trial, basically.
Yeah.
Is what you would need to actually make a change, or get the, I don't know what the word is, to like get them on board, like policymakers, I guess. And then I think Ken Friedland was talking a lot about effect sizes and how to power your study based off the literature and something that's clinically relevant, rather than, for example, like the worst thing to do would be, in his mind, is probably to collect data in a pilot study that's not actually designed to demonstrate efficacy, and then to use that effect size to power
Which is
your
what
bigger
everybody
study,
does,
which is what lots of people do.
I know, when I first heard him say that a couple of years ago, I was like, well, why are we doing the pilot study,
Yeah.
right? Because you always say, well, we're going to do it to
Yeah.
estimate sample size for
So-
every trial, right?
So in the panel, in the nuts and bolts, he gave like a whole session on what a pilot trial is and isn't, and that was so informative, especially for me, because not in my study, but in another study that we're doing, the title is called a pilot trial, and it's not a pilot trial.
Yeah.
And I've realised that, and I'm actually going to have to somehow approach that with the supervisor and say, you know, we can't call this a pilot trial, because it isn't a pilot trial.
I know Ken and I, so Ken's the editor-in-chief and I'm associate editor on health psychology, and we're always like, you know, he'll send me papers and stuff like that, and we're always like joking about pilot trials. It's like, well, what are you piloting exactly? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
it's
so
like
that
a big in-joke now.
I've never really thought about that properly,
Yeah.
so that was really, really informative and eye-opening. And there was a paper that they kept going on about what a pilot trial is and isn't. I think it was like a slightly older paper. I have got it. I can't remember the name of it.
You know, but
So-
the idea that, oh, if you do an efficacy trial and it fails, then you call it a pilot. Right?
Yeah,
We
and
went over that quite a few times.
similarly, like so in that panel, he was talking about if a reviewer asks you to demonstrate some efficacy or in a pilot trial, then you can rebut that because the purpose wasn't to demonstrate efficacy
At all, yeah.
at all. And so yeah, that again is like the study that I'm talking about that I'm involved with is just not a pilot trial. It should actually be a proof of concept, and so I'm in a sort of difficult situation now where I'm like, this trial is not in the right stage of the orbit.
Well, I would just go and say, you know, I've been to a conference and been learning a lot about terminology that people use,
Yeah.
you know, and how to be precise, and here's a paper.
yeah, and I think that would be fine.
Yeah.
I quite often do things like that with my supervisor. It would be fine. Yeah, and the other thing is about like pilots and feasibilities being inherently linked to a larger trial. And you might stop at that stage, but it should actually be with a larger trial in mind, which I think also is sometimes that doesn't necessarily happen. You might do a trial and it be feasibility or pilot, and it's not actually inherently linked to
Yeah,
the
so
larger
why would you
trial
care about
as well.
feasibility?
Yeah, so that as well. What else? Oh, so on that sort of note, in the nuts and bolts trial, someone asked about dealing with supervisors that aren't necessarily not against this sort of behavioural trials methodology piece, but maybe ignorant to it, or like not ignorant. That's probably a bit too
Well, I
harsh,
mean,
but-
that's not the way we were trained, right? You
No.
know, even my generation, which isn't that long ago, like, we didn't learn this stuff, right?
No.
So you have probably many supervisors
Yeah.
who were just having the straight, narrow RCT, you know,
Or-
training,
But
right?
even people that are doing interventions for the first time, perhaps in the clinical population,
Yeah.
applying their like research to that, because this is the first time I've done a behavioural intervention, but this methodology type thing is really important to me. It's not necessarily as important to other people that I'm working with, and so yeah. But Linda Powell, I think, said, well, it's learning works both ways. So again, I think after doing this, I have a bit of confidence to say, here in the papers, this is why I'm doing the things the way I'm doing them, or whatever.
Yeah, and you can back it up, you know. With
Yeah. Oh, and then other thing I found really useful was Ken Friedland's talk about comparators and how to pick a comparator and not accidentally changing your research hypothesis because you changed your parameter.
I think that's great, right?
Comparator.
Yeah, because it's like some
Also
reviewer
super
says you really need an active treatment, and you think, well, okay, if it's gonna get me the funding,
Yeah.
then you realize well, that's not the research question I set
Yeah,
out to answer,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so during that, I was feeling very lucky that I'd made the right, some of the right decisions with my comparator in my trial, because I could have easily made the wrong decision and changed the research hypothesis.
Mm-hmm. That's always been one of my pet. I can't tell you how many talks I've given about choosing control groups.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, according to a research question rather than.
yeah.
So like if you're comparing against usual care, you wouldn't have your control group that had like you wouldn't wouldn't need
Like
to
it
resemble.
depends what the research question is,
Yeah,
right? You
so
know.
it depends, yeah. So that was really good. Yeah, so those are the main things I found like really super useful for me right now as well. And then some other things that stuck with me. I can't remember who said it, but someone said, "Are you doing the most important thing you can be doing? And if not, why not?" And I've not stopped thinking about that since. Like, yeah, I found that really influenced the way I'm thinking about my research at the moment. And then also someone else said that if you're doing like a long-term behavioural intervention, during that time you might not be able to publish, and seeing as we're working within a system that the incentive is to publish, which I don't like being a part of, but they did have a good piece of advice was that if you are not going to publish for a long time because you're running an intervention, for example, then to get involved in someone else's big data set that they haven't necessarily analysed yet. So to like make contact with a PI and say, "Oh, I'm happy to analyse this data." So I think Linda was like, if someone said that to me, I'd be like, yes, I need this data analysed. So that would be a good way to publish if you're doing
that's good
big
advice.
intervention. So I found that good as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you. It sounds like you got a lot out of the conference. That's great. Okay, well, let's go around and, let's hear a bit more about CAPO. You missed Liam's CAPO summary, which was cool. We talked a bit about having the patients involved, the patient representatives, and there was a lot of that. So if you guys want to share just sort of what was, we're talking about things from the conference that expanded on or, sort of reflect back to some of the topics from the class.
I guess I can speak most to it. I don't know if I can mention apps for it, but I also went to the apps.
Oh yeah, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, so that one was really cool for me. I was presenting a poster, but throughout the conference, just like Jane said, there was a lot of patients engaged. Like at some point, you'd be in a room and like, okay, so which one of us are researchers and which one of us are patients?
And does it matter?
Sometimes it was like a 50-50 split.
Yeah.
Information, and that was really awesome and kind of different for me because you'd be involved in a lot of little discussions and then realize like, oh, you're coming from a patient perspective of being in a study and how that was and what your involvement is on that level. So that was really cool. It really did touch on a lot of the things that are important for my project, which is how I can involve patients. So that kind of touches on our knowledge translation and also our patient-oriented research projects of the course. But those were the big parts for me. So it's how I can involve how I can take what I've been learning, like here and here, and kind of put those into practical ways of involving people into my study. And so that's what I've tried to do just as I've been creating it. A lot of it has just been participant feedback forms, so they've just been incorporating into like every class now and have a chance to give me their participant feedback when it comes to the assessments that they do. So I'm doing a physical activity program and just, okay, now we did like 6 batteries of like physical fitness assessments. How did you feel about them? Was that like too much, too little? I've given you these questionnaires of like, I've picked like 4 things that I'm looking at. Your fatigue, your anxiety, depression, your self-compassion. Are there other things that you would have preferred to know about instead, like your patient-reported sleep outcomes when it comes to physical activity after a 12-week program? So
cool. So you've actually incorporated it into your project.
Yeah, it's little baby steps, but starting kind of small, and I think it would be really cool. A big part of apps for was how you can kind of take it further. That they're not just like, answering surveys, but actually becoming like committee members or really on the research team. So I'd love to have a patient representative. If it's possible to have someone kind of carry on and help not tweak it too much in the wave 2 of my recruitment, because I hope to run this twice, but or even if it was just like a thought for like when they created this bigger randomized control trial off of this first feasibility trial. And you just made really good points about the difference between pilot and feasibility, so I'm going to research that now. So, but yeah, that was apps for. So.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. And I think it is crucial, like, everyone wants to engage patients, but you have to look at how you're gonna do it,
Exactly.
right, in a way that
And in a way that's real and not.
it's real, and it's
like,
not just
genuine and not
tokenism,
just-
right?
yes,
And
exactly.
that you're actually gonna listen to what they say and, you know, act on it. And,
Exactly.
yeah, so, and you don't wanna bring them in too soon before you're ready and, you know, frustrate the person or frustrate yourself,
Absolutely.
right? So, yeah.
You're part of it, and then like, I don't really know what you can do yet, but it's
Yeah.
coming.
Yeah.
So,
Cool, thanks.
I was also quite impressed by the SPORE conference. I don't know.
Sounds like everybody loved it.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was a really fun
well
conference.
Wow.
Yeah.
How come it was so fun? I'm so disappointed I missed out.
And so I want to talk about that one. So there's a few things that I kind of took away from that. So the first one was the keynote speaker, Victoria Maxwell, and she talked about mental health and stigma. And so I work with a population that has a lot of stigma around it, so lung cancer.
Lung cancer.
And a lot of that has to do with the idea that if you have lung cancer, oh, you must have smoked and you really did this to yourself. Well, most lung cancer patients actually haven't smoked. A good portion of them never smoked. And if they did, it was when they were really young for a really brief time. So is
or even if they smoked right up until the time they got their cancer diagnosis, right? They had an addiction.
Absolutely, and it's
You know?
an addiction. It's not a behavior.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you know, being sedentary is a behavior. Smoking is an addiction. And so a lot of them don't actually seek out medical care, and a lot of them don't actually seek out to participate in research. And that's why we don't see a lot of lung cancer research out there, especially when it comes to those health behaviors, because it really raises some of those questions. They're like, oh, but I'm a smoker. Why does someone want to ask me about how well I'm doing and things like that? So when I was doing my master's project, I put in my ethics application, and I was hoping to get 50 plus people in my project. I was almost denied the ethics application because they told me you can't get enough people to run the study. You can't even get 30 lung cancer patients to actually participate, but since you're a graduate student, we'll let this one go.
We'll let you fail.
That's the reality. Choose another population, and this is the problem. It's choose another population, right?
Go to breast
No one
cancer,
wants
right? All
to-
the research is on breast
Right?
cancer.
No one wants to touch a lung cancer patient with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
And that's really sad. And so I was like, nope, I'm doing this. And they gave me approval. I'm like, good, let me show you how this is done. So I had over 150.
That's
Wow.
really
Right?
awesome. And you want to go back to them and wave it in their
I actually did. The person who approved my study, I'm like, guess what? You know, and I'm like, this is.
And how do you do it, right? Because
Yeah,
you should share
exactly.
those techniques with other researchers.
There isn't anything that I did. I think it's the fact that I actually reached out. And I said, I'm a graduate student. I mean, that might have something to do with it because they wanted to help a graduate student out. But I'm like, this is what the work that I'm kind of doing. Would you like to take part? And you know, when I talked to them because I sent out letter invitations, so when I got a chance to talk to them via email or mostly phone, it was like, you know, it's about damn time that somebody like actually, you know, wants to listen to us and wants to ask us some questions. And I'm like, you know, I've just like, this is a gold mine of opportunity for research to be done and to actually help these people. So it was really interesting how she talked about stigma and what influence it had over her and her experience, and how I feel like I can't relate to the lung cancer patient, but I can kind of see how the two are really, really related. And so that was really interesting. So that was a great way for me to start the conference because I'm like, oh, this is really good. I can kind of relate to some of this stuff. And then the other one was there were a few patient representatives at that conference, actually quite a few, and they were speakers at the seminars or at the sessions, and I really like that. And that is a true, we're not just actually preaching here, we're actually showing you that these people can be part of this conference and how they can be part of that. And one of them is Nicole McKenzie, and she actually works here at the UC. And she's also a researcher herself, and she was sharing her experience as being both. And I could kind of relate to that, and so I actually reached out to her and I said, I would like to kind of join whatever group you're with and to kind of see how I can contribute. Because my mom passed away from cancer, and she was quite palliative when she was diagnosed already. And so I saw little bits and pieces of her experience and how that was, and I'm like, there's certainly things that can be improved. And so I got in touch with her and the palliative care team, so potentially I could be not a patient representative, but
Well,
like a
you can
support
be.
person or
But they have
whatever the role is.
the patient advisory council has lots
Yeah.
of family members on
Yeah,
it,
exactly.
right?
So I asked her as a family member, can I be one? She's like, absolutely,
Yeah,
really, because
totally.
you know I might see things from a different perspective than the patient or the provider or things like that. So I'm definitely going to explore that a little bit more. And in terms of the sessions that were offered, there was really one that was really useful and helpful, and it was about 2 hours, but it was so worth my time. For the 2 hours, it was essentially you come in and they give you all the tools and answer all these questions. I don't know how many you've been to it. It's called, or it was called, what is it called here? How to Engage Patients and Knowledge Users. It was on the Wednesday. And Tali and I were both there, and it was so helpful. They literally gave you like printouts and little charts to fill out. You need to answer these questions. And I'm like, wow, things are really clicking. And so as a result of that session, my PhD work has 3, maybe 4 phases. I actually changed one of the phases completely.
Awesome. To like engage with the patients?
Yeah, so, well, not exactly. I was going to do some qualitative interviews to start off with my population, but Tali and I were chatting, we're actually thinking about taking all the lung cancer patients who have already gone through ACE, which is the Alberta Cancer Exercise Program, get a sense of how did they decide to start it, what was their experience like, and what would they tell the next lung cancer patient?
Yeah.
Okay, because a lot of them are like, is this really for me? Am I going to get hurt? Etc. etc. And then ask those same questions of those who are about to start the ACE intervention, but that's tailored and targeted to lung cancer population. And ask a similar group of numbers, hopefully, those same questions and see how their perceptions about exercise and how about themselves changes because of that exercise program. Yeah.
That's great.
So that's kind of like changed one of my faces really around completely.
That's
yeah.
very cool.
Great conference. Great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Totally worth $200. Money well spent.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you wrote some of that down in your final report or in your conference
I have
report.
not, but I will.
Yeah, because that's the kind of stuff that CIHR totally wants to hear, right? What's the impact of going through all this training? Is it actually having an impact on the students and the actual research that's being done and the patient engagement? Like, they'll be just like, yay.
Oh, awesome. I'm happy to write that up.
Yeah, that's great. Great, thank you.
So it was a body-based, so it's the ability to express your internal state through, through certain movements that you make, and they make art out of those movements, which is very different.
Oh, that's
It
a
was
neat
really
idea
cool.
for your young adults, right?
Yeah.
Totally. So with your Kegel presentation, what was it? Like on your research design and stuff like that. So how did you do it? Did Fiona talk? Yeah, and before you came, we were saying how they're going to try and get more and more patient involvement. What's it called? Patient? It's really crazy. You can get a label on your conference. It's patient engaged. What is it? Yeah, patient, I can't remember, if it's been patient involved, or I don't know what the terminology is, right? But they're trying to get this designation, and there's lots of requirements, right, to get the stamp of approval. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, and I'll remind everybody to get your reports in. So you got a final report template, and then you also have a conference summary for each conference that Traction helped to sponsor.
Yeah.
Okay, so I went to IBTN.
You're so loud.
So I went to IBTN, the summer school in the conference, and then I also tried to go to CPS, like Canadian Pain
So I had
Society.
the same weekend.
But I spent most of my time at IBTN. So one thing that stood out for me for IBTN was I went to the N of 1 workshop, and it was really good, and it really, like, I think fits within, like, the patient involvement piece that we've been talking about in the Traction seminars. So basically, like, in N of 1, the way that, like, the people who did the workshop described it was like you have like a clinician and a patient, and they collaboratively decide what treatments they're going to do, and then it's just like with each patient you make like different decisions and then just randomize them and they do it. So I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, and then so when I talked about it, I had shown the design thing. So you're talking more about the decision realm. Well, what are the treatments you're actually going to test, right? And so the patient agrees they're going to be blind, right? I guess you can't do that with behavioral intervention so much.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really interesting.
Were they using drug trials as examples, or did they show how you could do it with different behavioral things?
They didn't give too many examples, I think. But they kind of argued like in terms of like behavioral things and stuff like that, because it has to be something that's like reversible.
Yeah.
And so they made a big argument for the fact that like you don't really gain so much in a lot of behavioral things that you might do. So that was kind of interesting. Yeah, they didn't. What examples did they use? I'm not sure. I don't remember what specific example they used, but it wasn't like behavioral so much.
Right. I would use something like acupuncture, but the participant would still know that. So say you want to compare massage and acupuncture or something for pain, right? I mean, the patient knows when they're getting massage or acupuncture, you know. So you can't really. You can still try them both and measure the response, but you can't blind the patient to which one they're getting, right? I mean, that's a common methodology issue in behavioral trials anyway. Right? So you'd come across that in the N of 1s too.
Yeah, it was really interesting, just like, and it's also interesting to hear about like their take on like how it can help figure out like what treatment is best for which person. So you can like publish a protocol for an N of 1 trial, and a bunch of researchers can run the trial with different patients, and then when you start like compiling the data, you look at like what are the types of people who respond well to which treatments.
Right. So you put together all your N of 1s, and then you have a large enough group to make sort of generalization.
Yep, that was really cool. And then for like CPS, I didn't get to go to a lot of it, but it was, I think they have that designation. Like this year at CPS, they had that like patients. Is it like patients included?
Yeah, that's it.
Is that what it is?
Patient included, yeah.
Okay.
And so
there's a hashtag and everything for it.
And so what was it? Did you get a feel that it was that way? Like,
yeah, I didn't like. I think it was probably from what I went to that I didn't get that feel so much. Like, I went to like something on opioids, and that was like it was like just all doctors there. Yeah. So it wasn't as much patient focused from what I saw there, but I mean there must have been patients there. No, didn't get to interact with them though.
Cool. Yeah, thank you.
So I'll share two stories. One was at the SPOR conference. It's the same seminar that Julie's mentioning. So this researcher, she realizes that head and neck cancer patients really aren't well studied. They aren't engaged. It's difficult to communicate with them. So she decides that okay, this is what I want to study. And she describes this, her initial story about, her assumptions and how all of her assumptions regarding engaging patients were wrong. So, so she invites, she finds a patient to start off her intervention with, and she's like, okay, let's meet next week, let's hang out, let's meet at a Starbucks. And then when she goes and meets her, she goes into the Starbucks and the patient is sitting, and then she realized that every part of choosing that venue was incorrect because head and neck cancer patient, they if they have like the speaking difficulties, they have to wait. Yeah, it's too loud. They have to wait for them for people to speak, and then she wasn't really drinking her coffee because most of the coffee there is like piping hot, so they avoid beverages that are too hot.
And some of them can't even
Yeah.
drink those, or they won't drink coffee
Yeah.
or whatever, right?
Right. So
Julie's smiling.
so every aspect of her decision to go and meet this patient was wrong, and I think just being honest to be able to admit that, and sharing like her journey that started from there, not knowing it, and then actually coming to know the world of the patient and the experiences, and even the choice of her intervention. It sounded like it sounded crazy at some point, but I loved it. Like it was
What was
good.
it? It was this body.
Yeah, so
thing.
it's essentially ways in which you express your internal emotional psychological state through movements of your body. Like let's say if you want to break something, you know, you take a flower pot and you break it, and then you wait there, and then there's an artist who works with you, who tries to through pictures as well as
It's like the
through
digital
sculpture.
storytelling.
Yeah, it's that, but the only thing it's called the living art or something. It's like body art, so it's also interfacing with the actual physical person itself. So the artist needs to be there physically in front of you when you are expressing whatever it is that you're going through.
And so she's evaluated this approach.
Yeah, she's evaluated this approach for patients. Yeah, so and it's like even the colors that they choose, the expressions, the like the paintings that are drawn out of it are also through interactions with these. So they help select the colors that may express a certain mood. Or
And
a
then
certain
what did the
emotion.
participants say about going through the process of doing that?
Yeah, so that's the best part, is that it was co-presented by the head and neck cancer survivor, who sort of helped get this intervention up and running, and he said the same thing, is that it's important to not try too hard. Like his advice to physicians was like, don't try too hard. It's just like be there and listen, and sometimes that's all it takes. And sort of his experience was just um, like his ability to be free and to be okay with things, and he sort of, whenever he spoke, he had to obviously wait a bit. It took more effort to him, but he could clearly express and communicate and share his experiences with an audience, and that was pretty awesome, man. So
well, you hear the theme, right? Everyone's saying it's so powerful to hear the people who've been through these experiences. Like Liam said the same thing, right? And just how it makes it so much more real and engaging. Right?
So I think that was cool. It's like the whole research, and the other one was, I think my main takeaway from IBTN was, I generally, whenever it's like, if it's a lot of, if it's a study that comes from a big research group that's backed by a lot of money, you just tend to say that, okay,
must be good.
Yeah, you just bow your head and show your respect, and you must be right. And I think they started off IBTN by ripping apart a study like that, like $10 million.
Oh, at the summer school.
Yeah. So it was like a $10 million study done by one of the largest research groups, and they just ripped it apart, like every part of it. So that was good. So that felt good.
That felt good.
So.
Yeah, even
and then,
the
and then
experts
yeah. So it was like, you don't have to buy it just because it's backed by all of this stuff. It's really the methodology, because their claims were that sort of the behavioral trials don't have that much of an effect when they actually decided to measure. It was in diabetics, people who had diabetes, they gave a intervention that was tested in pre-diabetic.
First mistake,
Yeah,
right?
so that was
population.
wrong population, and they picked the wrong outcome measure. Like if you're testing it on diabetes, then it should be something related to diabetes or weight loss.
Rocket science.
Yeah, and then they tested. It was like their HDL levels, and it was it was sort of related to their lipid profile and heart
Mm.
disease risk.
Hmm.
So again, mismatched outcomes.
Well, and if you follow the orbit model, then you would have chosen your outcome.
Yeah.
You would have shown that it was clinically meaningful, and you
Right.
would have shown that you could move it the right amount
Yeah.
before you launched into the big trial,
Right.
right? Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, everyone's learning as they go along. Right?
Yeah.
I'm sure those people who did the $10 million trial thought they were doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And the granting agency who gave them the $10 million thought it was good too. The
Yeah.
reviewers all thought it was good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was like NIH, like it was like I think
It was
the
like a massive.
yeah, it's like the
multi-site
bigwigs,
kind of-
yeah,
Yeah,
the-
there was a ton of people.
yeah.
It's crazy, eh?
Yeah.
We're just going through, everyone's still, we can zoom through the other stuff, but everyone's, I think it's really interesting and valuable, just sharing the insights from the conferences. Yeah, so you missed everybody else, but.
Sorry.
So yeah, people were just sharing sort of what stood out for them at the conferences and how it relates to what things we've been learning here. So I don't know if you are ready to share.
Did everyone already share?
Yeah, the person's just finishing, we've gone all the way around.
Can I have like in a 2-word summary, like the theme of what everyone like?
Well, one of the main themes has been just how useful it is to hear from the patients directly about their
Yeah.
experience, right? And to, not assume that you know what's the best for them.
I can like speak to, how long does this have to be?
Oh, just a couple minutes.
Okay, well, I can base it off of the conference report that I filled in, because I was trying to, especially after reflecting on IBTN, kind of like broader issues, like bigger picture concepts, some of the things, and a lot of them tying together for me. But one of the huge ones is to think about the big picture, the entire process at every stage, and that a lot of that kind of included implementation, things we've been talking about, and patient engagement too. Like from the get-go, you can build an implementation by ensuring that you're designing something that's under a certain price point, for example, and from the get-go you can ensure it's something that patients will find valuable, that they might, or providers will find important by engaging stakeholders in the design and like the design process and coming up with interventions. So that was one thing, like thinking of the big picture all the way throughout.
Yeah, and Rosie said something similar too.
Some of the other things were some things that stood out to me during the summer school, especially. It seemed there was a lot of discussions about trying to balance idealism with pragmatism, and a lot of talk about, well, this is all well and good, but reviewers are going to think it's crap unless there's a control group, because we all learn that's as rigorous. And so I was reflecting on how they don't have to be at odds, and how you can follow the way it's supposed to be, because you kind of can't just give in to what you think the reviewer will like, or what you think is mostly to get
Because
published.
you're the one who has to actually do the study.
Yeah, and then it maintains a status quo, and if we want to change the way people think about behavioral trials and do them, then you have to actually engage in making those changes, even if it's going to be harder to maybe get your work funded or published. But ways to kind of do that can include, like, always explicating why you're doing things and citing these methods papers, and then maybe in talking about the big picture and where the classic RCT that everyone knows about fits into your program of research might be ways to help doing that. So those were some things.
Yeah, situating something within a larger framework is always useful, right? Because you can see why, how you led up to where you're at, what you're going to do, this little piece, and then where you think it might be going, right? That's what, reviewers appreciate that. It's always been theory. Where's your theory, right? So this same kind of idea, right, in terms of methodology.
And then one other thing, in a lot of the talk about reporting thoroughly and how important that is. I don't know if you guys have thought this, or probably have thought of this too, but I get the sense that sometimes people don't report things because there's like a shame around, like, I didn't do a good job, or like,
So I'm not going to mention it.
Exactly, like I'd rather just not report my fidelity outcomes than report having bad fidelity. And I think we need to do more to encourage a culture of, like, reporting anything is good. Like, I don't want to penalize people for reporting
And when they give you quality rating scores, because there's another thing that came out recently that, all the time, like, there's these papers, these review papers and meta-analyses that rate the quality using whatever kind of, marking framework, right? And so you get a point for reporting treatment fidelity no matter how bad it is.
Exactly.
Right? You get a point if you report it.
Yeah.
Right? So some of the scales vary. It can be 0 to 5, like a Haddad scale, or there's some, I saw one that's up to 25. And, so I'm looking at, like, one of our studies, an early study, they got a really low score
Right.
because we didn't report stuff, but I had all that data,
Right.
right? And a lot of times we didn't report it because of word limits, or maybe back then we didn't think it was important,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So there's lots of stuff I'm like, well, you're penalizing me for not reporting something, but I did that. I
Right.
did it, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, so if you'd have asked me, I could tell you, no, we actually did do that.
Yeah.
You know, it's
So I
just
guess
not in the
making
paper.
sure you have like tons of appendices where everything's really clearly
Or
on
having
a
those
website or
checklists,
something.
like it's not just a concert checklist, right? It's
Right.
the things they're looking at are even more complex than that, right?
Yeah.
Some of them. So, you know, having a sense of like what are the kind of things that your trial could be evaluated on, you know, and if you did it, then mentioning it, right?
But yeah, I think it's important to help change the mindset. Like, don't be ashamed to report a bad outcome. Be ashamed to not report it.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to roll by shame.
Yeah.
You
Well, that's
have
really
to be
good.
ashamed once.
Like, be honest, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure,
I
you
just
know?
want honesty is integrity. That should be reinforced.
Yeah, like with the MASH study, you know, there's this, oh, the person was assigned to a wait list, but now they refuse to go in the wait list and they want to go in the immediate group. Can we just pretend they were assigned to immediate? And I'm like, no, we
No.
can't just reassign them and
Right.
pretend that that's how it was supposed to be. That's how they were randomized. It's like we can let them do what they want, but we need to record all this and we're going to have to
Yeah.
report it.
Yeah.
That this breach protocol, this person is not randomized to this group.
Right.
You know, and someone else who is randomized to immediate wants to go to delayed. And so the research assistant will be like, well, it's all going to balance out. So let's just pretend, you know, let's just let them go in their groups.
Yeah.
It's like, no, that's you know, that's
Yeah.
not the way it was randomized.
When I see something like that now, probably because of doing all that, it's like, oh, I trust everything they say because they're explicit about this, so I know that
About this
they're
messy
forthright.
piece, right?
Yeah,
Where,
you
oh,
know,
we
they're
only
forthright
have
about everything.
data on this questionnaire, you know, we have missing data on the questionnaire XYZ for the first 20
Yeah.
people because we forgot to include it in the battery, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Such as
but that's
reality of
real
running a
life, right?
trial.
You're like, oh, okay, I've done that. You know, you're like, these
Yeah.
things happen.
Yeah.
No, that's useful. Awesome. Well, that's a great discussion. So let's kind of zoom through. I was going to do scalability, sustainability, and then sort of social media stuff, more kind of for fun if we have time. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but it is important, and it sort of is. It has been incorporated into the whole knowledge translation and implementation piece. So scalability, I was looking up definitions, and it comes from like computer science and networks and stuff like that. So a general definition is an attribute that describes the ability of a process, network, software, or organization to grow and manage increased demand. So how scalable is it? It can be low scalable, just like you cannot handle any more people coming through or any more processes, or it can be highly scalable where we can handle 10 people in an hour or we can handle 1,000 people in an hour, that kind of idea. And then I found a definition. There's a report I put on your D2L. Actually, I don't think it's this one, but it's written by the same people. So these guys did surveys of healthcare scalability specifically, and they interviewed a bunch of you know, policymakers and stakeholders, and they came up with this definition, which appears to have not existed before, as the ability of a health intervention shown to be efficacious on a small scale and or under controlled conditions. So that's our whatever intervention we're studying, right, or you know, exercise for fatigue or mindfulness, to be expanded under real-world conditions to reach a greater proportion of the eligible population while retaining effectiveness. So that's the scalability piece. So they don't talk about money in this, but it is essentially about money, more or less. And it's usually combined with sustainability, right? This is the scalability article, the second one that I put online for you. So this is a narrative review, and what do you know? There's like 18 models for scaling up public health interventions. Yeah, you know, how many models have I shown you guys, right? Like over the last few weeks, it's like, oh, there's 25 models for this, there's 69 models for that. So there's a bunch of models. And this was specifically more like public health interventions, like, you know, HPV testing and stuff like this, but interventions within the healthcare system. And this is some of the models and frameworks, and I think there was literally 8 or something like that in this article. You know, when they talk about, a lot of them have very similar components and steps, right? So the idea is you have to maintain effectiveness of your intervention in a real world setting. But you want to look at how far your reach can extend into the population. You know, how are you going to get it adopted on a large scale in the people you're trying to target? What are the resources that you have available to you? How much is it going to cost? How are you going to deliver the intervention? What's the context, right? So a lot of these public health interventions are in like rural Africa and places like that, right? So it might be urban, it might be rural, it might be looking at different socioeconomic status, you know, cultural issues, and how are you going to evaluate it? And you need resources for that. You know, and this other one here talks about a 4-step process. So first you have to assess how scalable and suitable your intervention is for being scaled, like is it actually going to happen? Come up with a plan, a vision, what it's going to look like, you make a case, you know, and then you prepare for scaling. So first you assess it, you come up with a plan, you get ready to do it, you get the resources, you know, you build the cooperation and support, then you do it, and then you evaluate. So, same old, basically. And then sustainability. So this is interesting too, because when you look up sustainability, it's largely in an environmental context, right? Everyone talks about sustainable development and, you know, how we can, yeah, it's usually about like economic development and like, you know, oil and gas industry or whatever it is, how we can do this development but still not harm the environment. But they also talk about sustainability in healthcare, and I found this report from the Conference Board of Canada, and it's this group, what are they called? The Canadian Alliance for Sustainable Healthcare. So such a thing exists. And they came up with this report about defining health and healthcare sustainability. And they define it as the appropriate balance between the cultural, social, and economic environments designed to meet the health and healthcare needs of individuals and the population, you know, all across the spectrum, health promotion, treatment, end of life. That leads to optimal health and healthcare outcomes, and here's the sustainable part, right? Without compromising the outcomes and ability of future generations to meet their own health and healthcare needs. So instead of environmental sustainability, it's sustainability of healthcare for the next generation. So it's health, you know, so if we spend all our money now on healthcare and there's nothing left for the future, then it's not sustainable. So again, it comes down to money, right? And so they have this neat little model, this sustainability framework that's in that report. Everyone likes to draw, I like little pictures, right? So they have these guiding principles that are on the bottom. So the appropriateness of the intervention, you know, and this is based on sort of how effective it is, right, for different populations, the value for money, you know, so how much impact in terms of health promotion or treatment do you get for how much it costs? Can we provide fair and timely access and accountability for results? So always looking at results, right? So those are sort of the guiding principles. So you have to have all these things in place. And then they have these pillars here, which I'm not really sure what all of them are, but it kind of goes across the spectrum, right? So prevention and promotion, effective healthcare systems, you know, models, innovation. What's the next one? Human resources, and looking at this. So strategic alignment with determinants of health. Usually determinants of health means like socioeconomic sort of factors, right? Anyways, a little bit airy-fairy, but if you read the report, you'll get a sense of the kind of things that they're looking at. So why does any of this matter anyway, right, for us? Well, I'll give you an example of something that happened to me that made me realize I had to start thinking about this, which I wasn't enough. So I'll give you an example. So I was thinking about wanting to reach more people with our mindfulness-based cancer recovery program, because it's only available in person in Calgary, and there's lots of cancer patients all over the place who could benefit. So we created an online version, right? And this was a PhD project for Kristen Zernicke. And we had a facilitator, we had a trained facilitator who was leading the groups, and people could come on and do the intervention. And we did a pilot study, and we showed that it was effective, right? So that was in 2012, and we did a small pilot RCT. We had 63 people from around Alberta. It was a waitlist controlled trial, and we showed that, you know, the intervention was similarly effective to in-person. So I thought, okay, perfect. I'm going to get this into practice, right? Everybody, every cancer patient through AHS should have access to this, right? So they had this thing called an enhanced care grant that you could apply to for any new clinical services that weren't already existing, right, that you needed money for. And I thought, well, this should be a shoe-in, right? So the enhanced care grants were evaluated. There's this council that evaluates them, and they were funded in conjointly by Alberta Health Services and Alberta Cancer Foundation. And they're like 3-year grants or something like that. And the idea is that they pay for it outside the system, and if it goes really well, then AHS will adopt these things as ongoing, right? So it was rejected. Why was it rejected? They told me, so I put this proposal, I made the case, right? You know, it's effective, it can reach those, it was because it wasn't sustainable, they said. It wasn't scalable. And by that, I take it wasn't cheap enough. And it was interesting. So I actually got a personal phone call from the head, like one of the VP at the time of Alberta Health Services to explain to me why they weren't funding it. And basically, the budget was $115,000 over 3 years. And that took into account, you know, someone to administer it, the facilitators, the equipment we needed to give people, and using the platform with eMindful that we use now. And the number of people that we had figured we could serve was smaller groups of 12 people at a time doing the online thing, and it's going to go just 3 times a year to start out with. So it came out to around 108 people over the course of the program. Well, that's about $1,000 a participant, right? And they were just like, it's too expensive. It's not sustainable, right? It's not scalable. You have to do better, and they just sent me away. So it was very sad. And I just, you know, I left it, and it's still not a program that is accessible to patients where it should be. And actually, it's not true. I didn't just go away. So I ended up contracting with eMindful. I wrote them a manual, like an actual therapist manual, so that they could train their own therapists. And now it's available for $200 a patient, right? And that's how much we're paying in the current trial. So we're doing another trial of it. I'm only paying $200 a patient, and my plan is still, once we finish this study of using it during chemotherapy, to go back to AHS and say, come on, right? Yeah, and I might even pay for it, you know, out of my own research budget if it's that cheap, right? Yeah, so it wasn't easily enough scalable the way that it's done, because you can't serve a endless number of people because it's live and interactive, right? I mean, and that's part of the reason too I started thinking about apps. Well, okay, they might not be as intensive as an effective, but you can have much broader reach, right? And if you know the formula for population health interventions, they always talk about effectiveness times, what's it called, like scale equals your effectiveness, right? So say an intervention in person is really useful and effective, and it'll improve a person's score, whatever it is, by 10 points, right? So they're going to be 10 points better. And if you do it, say, online, where people do a self-help version or an app version, it's going to only improve their outcome 2 points, right? But if with the individual intervention, you can only reach 10 people a year, so you get 1,000 points improvement, right? 100 points times 10 people. If you can reach 10,000 people with the broad intervention, then you get, you know, whatever it is, 2,000. You know, you get much more cumulative impact, right? When you multiply the 2 points by the 10,000 people or whatever it is. So that's kind of the idea of scalability, is that ideally you want to maintain the effectiveness, but even if it's watered down a little bit, if you reach more people, you're going to have a larger societal impact, right? Anyway.
So but they actually, at IBTN also they mentioned Dean Ornish and his, and, you know, his intervention was like 6 months.
It's possible, yeah.
Yeah, in a resort, you know, where you.
So this is a comprehensive lifestyle intervention that Dean Ornish did, where he took prostate cancer patients, I think, to begin with, and, you know, had them on a vegan diet. They were doing exercise. They were doing meditation. What else were they doing? Yoga. I don't know. It was a really comprehensive lifestyle intervention, right? And it went on. They had to come a couple times a week.
Yeah,
for
6 months. Yeah.
You know, I mean, and that's a really good proof of concept.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, this can be done.
Right.
Is it scalable or sustainable? Not in any way.
But I feel like I think I don't you know, I feel some interventions are okay if they're expensive, because he demonstrated you know, gene express, like the outcomes that he demonstrated, reversal of heart disease, gene expression.
Well, that's proof of concept, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, is that like, should he just develop it for rich people, or I mean, like, I think somebody should be behind it, even if it's expensive.
Well, it's a philosophical question, right? So, you know, there's all these arguments in the healthcare system about these new experimental drugs, right? You know, so there's someone who's got some rare brain tumor, and, you know, there's nothing else they can do with conventional medicine, but there's some experimental drug out of the States that costs $100,000 every time you take it, right? Should the healthcare system, and it may extend life by 2 months or something, right? So should we all be paying for that brain tumor patient to have that drug? Or should we be paying for some public health education thing on quitting smoking, right? So, I mean, there's a limited pool of money. You know, you want to say we should pay for it all, right? But we can't. You know, so they have to make some tough decisions. Right?
I'm feeling like in terms of calculating scalability, cost savings is ideally a part of it, but I wonder how much that actually does end up being a part of it. Like, I don't know if, or do you find that just as often, like that's always included? Because every time I see people talk about it, they always talk about intervention can be delivered for under X amount of dollars.
Yeah, everything's about money.
Right, but like, is there a ton of research about cost savings of
Yeah.
as much? I just don't see it talked about as much, but maybe.
You know, the people doing the research, they don't find it that interesting, right? Because, you know, we want to change behavior. We don't necessarily want to measure how much it costs, right?
Yeah.
But the people who make the decisions have to have the dollar amounts in front of them. You know, so we've added a health economic component into the MATCH study, right? We don't talk about it much, but it's there.
Right.
And I did a study many years ago with Steve Simpson, and who's the other person? Michael True, I think, another psychiatrist, where Steve had done an intervention that was a 6-week psychosocial intervention for women with breast cancer. And it was, you know, support groups, a little relaxation, it was kind of a mishmash. And the comparator was usual care. And so we followed those women for 2 years after the intervention. And this was my job when I was a postdoc. I went in and got all the costing data, right, from Alberta Health, and that had all the information on their emergency room visits, their primary care doctor visits, all their cancer care, their medications. And we looked at the costs over the 2 years, and it was 25% less in the women who did the intervention, which cost like $600 or something. It's interesting, right? You know, but so that kind of information you think would be really valuable to decision makers, but you know, sometimes they look at it, sometimes they don't, but we should always be making the case. That's called medical cost offset. There's a huge literature on how psychosocial treatments or psychotherapy, like if you're treating within depression, right, and in mental health areas, that if you treat a person's depression and anxiety, then their other medical costs go way down. You know, because they're not showing up in an ER with a panic attack every 2 weeks or whatever it is, right? They're not taking as many medications. They're not, and if you look even more broadly to societal impacts, you know, they're not taking as much time off work, right? They're contributing more to the economy and paying taxes and blah, blah, blah. So that was all I had for scalability, sustainability. I don't know if there's any other comments.
How can you get access to the information on their healthcare usage, like after an intervention, if you haven't prospectively decided that's what you're going to do?
Yeah, well, so it's actually, there's lots of movement on this front. There's like 2 huge applications going in right now for across Canada data linkage. And in Alberta, so one of the SPORE units is data. And so they have done a really good job now. It's way easier. In fact, I had a phone call with the guy not that long ago. We were going to do it for I talked to Devish about it, for the mindset study. And so now it's one-stop shopping. You can go to them. You don't even have to pay them. You can just tell them what information you want. You just need personal health numbers from the people. So for example, say you did a clinical trial. This is my case. I did a clinical trial 10 years ago, right? And I have women in different intervention groups. And so now I can go to these guys, give them everybody's number, and they can look up all the healthcare spending they've had in the last 10 years, and we can compare groups to see if there was any long-term impact.
Sounds too good to be true.
Do you need ethical approval?
Yeah, so you have to write up.
I can submit an amendment.
So you have to write up a protocol. It's not an amendment, it's a new protocol.
Okay.
Yeah, and saying this is a new study we want to do, and this is the variables we're going to look at, and then you make a case for either why you can't go back and get consent from the participants.
I probably can.
Or you go back and get consent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can change the consent form if it's ongoing. For us, it was and also, so our study was in Calgary and it was in Vancouver. And so they've also got a partner in BC who has similar data, right? So I talked to them and they're like, yeah, if you get the ethics approval and you give us a list of PHNs from the women in the study, we can look them all up and give you all that costing data. Yeah. Yeah, so it's quite cool. Yeah, so he hasn't followed up on that project, but I told him if he wants to, we could do that. We need to write up an ethics thing. The problem with that study is that everybody got an intervention eventually, right? So that's the problem with your waitlist trials, because for the long-term follow-up data, everyone's had the intervention. If you had a control group that never gets the intervention, it's much better, you know, because then you can follow them up long-term. So what we would be comparing is costs from women in the mindfulness group and costs from women in the supportive expressive group. So they each would have had one intervention or the other, so you might not expect a lot of difference, but I think it's worth taking a peek at. And we can also correlate, you can look at correlations between, you know, some of the And that might be just as interesting, some of the stress scores or, you know, looking at some of their psychological measures and then their costs, right? Even if the intervention didn't have an effect because you've got that long-term data. So I think it'll be really cool to do. Yeah, so there's these two big applications going in now for national data platforms where you could, and one of them is like the idea is that they're going to build up a database of people with all this data just about, I mean, they'll fill out questionnaires and they'll, you know, they'll have all their demographic stuff and you can recruit people for trials through this platform and you can get all the costing linkage data and social utilization. Yeah, it's really cool.
I'm curious about SPORE because I'm thinking about something very similar. But what I'm comparing is those who went through my intervention and those who didn't, who were matched but on sex, age, and disease status.
You could probably do that through the cancer registry, and then if you could identify the people through the cancer registry, and then give their numbers to the SPORE data platform, they could get the data.
Because I'll have the consent of those who went through my study.
Do you have consent to access all their data though? Oh, but you wouldn't have. You wouldn't need
not
consent.
the matched ones, right?
Yeah.
Those would be people who I never got in touch with.
I think you could probably get ethics approval just to go through and do that case control kind of process. You'd have to talk to registry about whether or not they'd let you do that or help you with it, because you need one of their analysts to do it. I think, unless the Alberta SPORE could do that piece too, because the Alberta SPORE has all these analysts that are totally free. The registry doesn't really like to give you their staff as readily. But the guy's name's Finley. I can put you in touch with him if you want. Yeah. Really accommodating. He's great. Any other things? How much time we got? Let's do a little bit of social media. Okay, why should I bother? It's fun. And when I'm talking social media, I mean, I'm going to go through some of the more academic-y stuff and then some of them are not academic-y. But really, it's a very good way to connect with other people in your area, get your name out there, get known, and to raise your profile, and to actually keep up with what's cutting edge and what's going on, what are people are talking about, right? So in terms of this academic social media, everyone should have a LinkedIn profile. Do you all? Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Get one.
LinkedIn.
Everyone's on LinkedIn. You have to be on LinkedIn.
Really?
Yes. Everyone's on LinkedIn. Twitter is less commonly used. I would say about a third, 40% of my sort of senior level colleagues are on it. But it's awesome for, I use it mostly at conferences. Really good for live tweeting at conferences, and I actually find it really useful for just helping me pay attention and focus and, you know, consolidate ideas and stuff like that. Twitter's only good if you use it, right, if you tweet. I mean, you can use it passively, right, just to check up and follow a few people and see what people are posting about or check some hashtags and stuff. But if you want to, you know, gain a following and stuff like that, you have to be on there fairly regularly. It's really good for research news. Facebook, you know, everyone's got a personal Facebook page, right? Don't mix your personal and your business. Don't, because I did that at first. I was letting all these work contacts be my friend on my personal page. My personal page is like my kids going to school and Halloween pictures, and I don't want to mix in work stuff, and I don't want my work colleagues involved in my personal life, right? So I kicked them all out. I sent them all an email, and when I created a page, I created a page called Mindfulness-Based Cancer Recovery. And so I sent them all an email. I said, you know, I'm reserving my personal Facebook account for, you know, family information, and for all the professional stuff, please join my page. And I probably, I don't know, some of them did. Probably hate me now. Yeah, but don't make that mistake at the beginning, right? So keep it separate to begin with, you know, because as you get more involved in a professional career, people are going to friend you and stuff like that, right? And you're just like, okay, okay. And then you're like, well, wait, do I really want all my colleagues to see me out partying with my friends, right? Maybe not. So you want to keep your personal and your professional very separate.
It's true. So someone posts pictures of you shooting bourbon.
Maybe I should have done that. You know, it's all in good fun, right? But you do have to, you know, you always hear that advice, is that everything that goes on your social media is there forever, right? And so if you don't want, if you can imagine down the road not wanting your prospective, you know, people who might be hiring you or working with you to see it, then don't put it on there. So the academic ones that I use are ResearchGate and academia, but I like ResearchGate better. And I'm going to show you all these. Do people use any of these?
ResearchGate.
Yeah, so ResearchGate is the most popular. Publons, anyone know that? Publons is newer, and it's actually for keeping track of all your reviews. So when you start reviewing papers, Publons tracks them, and it actually gives you points and stuff like that. And it's something that often you don't even put on your CV. And now some journals are starting to automatically use Publons. So Health Psychology and all the APA journals now are putting all their reviews automatically on there and setting up profiles for people. So I'll just show you what they look like. Actually, it's more fun if we do it live. Let's see here. I think I've got everything open, but I don't know where. See, there's Facebook. So that's my personal page. Wait, I was going to start with LinkedIn. Is LinkedIn? Well, that's Google Scholar. No, there's LinkedIn. So there's LinkedIn. There's the profile, right? Everyone's probably fairly familiar with it. I've got a request for, I don't know, I basically take everybody. You'll get all sorts of people, some that, you know, relate to your work and some that don't. Like this is some business ethics, someone at McGill, I'll accept them. I accept pretty much anybody. So I've got 1,400, it's not a huge number of connections. I post on this whenever I have a new publication. I post on this. So I don't post on this as much as I post on Twitter. And that's pretty much, like if you look at my profile, how do I find it here? Oh, here it is. So let's see. I'm just trying to see. Yeah, so here's my, oh, here's the activity. So you can see the kind of things I've been posting. Our latest paper's out. Unmet needs of adult cancer survivors, right? And then I posted our current acupuncture studies profile. So I just, you know, really kind of boring stuff. Here our new paper on care plan evaluation. So really on this, I'm just posting, you know, research stuff. And you can actually, I never really look at these, but 194 views of that post, 417 views. So people like that. People tend to interact with your LinkedIn stuff less than they do on Twitter, right? So there's not usually big conversations. There's all sorts of groups on LinkedIn, like on certain topics, you know, like they could be behavioral trials. I don't even know, like I don't engage in any of those, but I think I might belong to some of them. They keep changing it around. I don't even see it on here. I think maybe it's not used as much because they used to have all these different groups and then there'd be like conversations and it's kind of a waste of time. So that's LinkedIn, and let's find ResearchGate. So here's ResearchGate. You can see I've been ignoring it. So up here I've got like 60 notifications, 5 unread messages, and 39. I get a lot of reprint requests on this, and I send them to my website because on my website they can download everything with a password. So instead of, and you also have to be very careful on here. So this is interesting. You have to be very careful on here about uploading PDFs and violating copyright. So yeah, like when you go to, like 48 of my full texts aren't public, is because I'm not allowed to make them public on ResearchGate, right? So just because you can doesn't mean you should. So that they might tell you that it's Romeo green, Romeo red, or Romeo yellow when you go to upload it, depending on the journal. So if anything's yellow or red, you definitely can't upload it. Well, yellow, some of them you can. If it says Romeo green, you still need to check with the journal what their policy is on copyright. You have to be really careful because ResearchGate actually has been sanctioned for posting PDFs against copyright. Yeah, there was a big thing in the media. So I've got a profile here, and the most interesting thing is like to look at stats. So I've got 49,500 reads, 15,000 citations. So there's a list, like if I look on my contributions, it's got 214 publications, 180, I don't know what these other things are, if they're not articles. Well, here you go, 189 articles. So it finds them for you, right? Which is great. Like it just finds all your stuff and puts it in your profile. You don't have to do anything except maybe, sometimes it'll even add PDFs if they're open access. So you can add things if you want. I don't typically. So it's found 214 of my things, right? And you can actually go through and for each one see how popular it is and things like that. And then you can look at your stats. So there's a little graph here. So this shows you like 336 reads last week, almost 50,000, you know, all the different citations. I don't know who's recommending me for what, but apparently people are. You know, and it shows you your little reads here. I never looked at this weekly stats reports, but you can do that. And you can also interact with like questions and answers and stuff, but I don't.
What would be the benefit of having LinkedIn over ResearchGate? Because these
LinkedIn doesn't do publications.
Okay.
LinkedIn is just your profile, so that if say someone's looking to hire you, they'll look it up.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So LinkedIn doesn't list your publications at all, although you can you can put in a link or something to like your profile on PubMed or something.
Okay.
ResearchGate is where you put all your publications. So it lists all, like you can see 300 and what, 200 or whatever. So ResearchGate is where all your publications live, and then people interact, right? So, and I don't really use it to see what other people are doing very much. You know, it wants you to do stuff, but you can go to home and it'll show you what your connections are doing. I don't have very many connections either, I don't think, on here. But it's almost like a feed in Facebook, right? But it's a feed of people's papers. So if you wanted to, you can see what people are publishing, right? Imagined ugliness, a symptom which can become a disorder. Body dysmorphic disorder, interesting. Phyllis Buteau, right? So I know her. What's she publishing? Online information and support needs of women with advanced breast cancer. It's interesting. And so then, I guess that's how I get all these things, right? So I pop in people's feeds and they request the full text. And then I still need to send them, right? So they sit here. That's probably what these are. Yeah, so somebody in 7 others requested full text for, I think I had you doing this one time ages ago, sending full text to people. Yeah, so I haven't been doing it lately, right? So I need to sort of, what I do is just every now and then I go in and I cut and paste instructions on how to access my online stuff. So that's ResearchGate. So yeah, once you start having a few publications, you should get on here. And now the other one, what's this one? Oh, this is Publons. I wanted to show you academia. I don't use that very much. Oh, that's my daughter's dance photos. ResearchGate, Publons, LinkedIn. Well, I can show you Google Scholar. So Google Scholar, you don't have to do anything here. It just finds you, right? And it does the same kind of thing, right? So I've never done this, get my own profile, but you can just type yourself in, and your numbers on Google Scholar are always higher than your numbers in like, did you guys use Scopus? Scopus is like an online database. You never use Scopus? Scopus is so cool. No?
We're definitely not the cool kids.
So Scopus isn't like this is social. Google isn't really social networking, but ResearchGate and academia, they're social networking for researchers, right? They're not compiled by anybody really other than yourself, right? I mean, ResearchGate will find your articles, but Scopus is a tool through the library. It's like a database. And so it's just like PubMed, it's connected with PubMed, but you can look up by topic or by researcher, right? So you put in the researcher's name, and it pulls up all their publications, and it shows you, it's around citations, but it goes forward and backwards. So I can, I should just get you on it here. So cool. I love Scopus. There you go. So you've done this before. Scopus. Wait, what is this?
If you go back and click the first option.
I thought I did.
The database one, the one above that. Yeah, there.
Oh.
Yeah.
What was the thing I clicked on?
An article.
Oh, so weird. Okay, so now I think we're in it. So you go under, so you can do documents, but you can do, what's most interesting is to do authors. Right, so I can put in someone else. I can do me, but I can do anybody, right? So should we do one of you?
Not sure what's going to pop up.
Okay, so you have got, how many came up here? So this is, 2 documents.
Yeah.
So this is you. And so I click on you, and you've got 2 documents. So we can say show documents, or we can view your citation overview. I'll show the documents first. And then for each document, it tells you how many times. So this article here has been cited 10 times. Yeah, so I can click on the article, and it'll show me who you cited. But then I can click on this, and this shows me who cited your article, right? So you can see, oh, it's awesome. And you can, it shows you trees, too. Like it's just, yeah. So these are all the people who cited you, right? Religiousness, spirituality, and celebrate cortisol and breast cancer survivors, a pilot study. This just came out, right? So you can click on this, and you can look at all the citations in this article. Oops. Oh, it's just awesome. So where are the citations? Let me see. So here's all the citations. 49 references, and they're all listed here, right? So you can to look at a paper you wrote, you can see who cited it in the future, and then you can see who they cited besides you, right? And then you can click on any of those. So you might say, oh, stress and immune responses after surgical treatment for regional. Let's look at that one, right? So this is a Barbara Anderson paper from, what year? 1998. Oh, we don't look at that. It's kind of old, right? Oh, this is the raw beta psychoimmunology text. Everybody cites that. You know, so you can look through their citations, right? So it's really, really cool. And then there's all these graphs you can get to. So where are we? Are we on? We're still. So we can see who else cited you, right? Conducting biobehavior research in patients with advanced cancer, recruitment challenges and solutions. For some reason, they cited that paper. Female reproductive system. Oh, look.
You cited me.
I cited you. Well, you always got to cite yourself. But you know what? Look at. So I'll show you the citation overview. Who doesn't want to do it? So here's another one that cited you: systematic review of spirituality-based interventions and psychoneuroimmunological outcomes. It makes sense that they cited you. Anxiety and depression. Oops, it says this is like a book. You're in a book.
Phyllis Bulu cited me.
Yeah, there you go. See, you
I
would
feel really good about myself.
In the clinical pathway for screening, assessment, and management of anxiety, depression, and adult cancer patients. So you're in the Australian guidelines, right?
Wow.
And then you can, so then you can look at this one and see that it's been cited 19 times, right?
Yeah.
So you can, so we went from your study to see that it was cited in this study, and then we can see where this study has been cited in 19 other papers. It's really cool. You can spend a lot of time on Scopus. And then it doesn't want to do the citation overview. Let's see. Let's go back and see how to get it.
Do you have to select all
So
of them?
you can, yeah, we can select all your things, and then this gives you a little chart. So there it is. So that shows you your citations per year, right? And then this gives you, for each article, how many citations in each year, how many total citations, and you can sort by your most cited articles, right? Or you can sort by year. So I'll do myself to show you just a few more. How do we go back to it? So we'll do. Oops. Calgary. Okay. So I've got 153 in this database. So I can just check all those. Good news, your author feedback was and so then I can do like my citation overview for all the 153 papers, right? So where's my graph? There's my graph. Ooh, oh, that's 2018. Okay, so I'm pretty steady, right? Oh, that's neat. So 1,084 in 2014, 1,300. 1,200. I came back up in 2017. I've already got 620 citations. Oh, we're halfway through the year. Are we going to make it? And then it lists the papers by the newness here, right, and the number of citations. So a lot of the newer papers aren't being cited yet.
Yeah.
This one here has 26. Oh, that's our ASCO clinical practice guidelines. Sweet. And I can, so I've got 11,000 total citations. If I click on this, I can sort by the most highly cited. I think it's doing something. Is it doing something? Yeah, it's thinking. Oh, what did it do? Oh, that's not the right thing. What did that just do? I have no idea. That's weird. This should have just reordered that table. What happened? Huh. I thought if you clicked on that, show all the citing documents for the displayed period. Oh, what's it doing?
No, I think it's going to show all the people who cited you, like.
Yeah, I don't want to see
The
that.
11,000.
What about where the drop down menu sort
Why don't
on
we?
the newest?
Yeah, where's sort on? Oh, okay, where's
Right,
that?
right
Sort
there.
on. Oh yeah, citation count descending. That's what I wanted. I thought you could do by clicking. There it is. So 1750, my most highly cited article from 2004,
Right.
Mindfulness, a Proposed Operational Definition. Second most highly cited, Mechanisms of Mindfulness. It's interesting. You can see what people care about. They're all the mindfulness stuff, right? Randomized waitlist controlled trial. That's the first study we ever did. The first study on mindfulness in cancer patients. So 607. Yeah, so if we go back, I was just going to do one little example of, see who cited Jill's paper. So bright white light therapy has been cited once already. Let's see who cited it. high cost of low-grade inflammation, persistent fatigue as a consequence of reduced cellular energy availability, and non-adaptive energy expenditure. Sounds like something you'd care about. There you go. So then you're like, oh, I should read this paper because they said it. I see we're almost out of time. And we haven't even got to do fun stuff on Twitter. So Google Scholar, same thing. Oh, so the interesting thing here about Scopus is that Scopus gives you the H-index. Well, I won't go back through it, but Scopus gives you a more conservative H-index because you saw there was only 153 articles in my Scopus search, but there's 200 and some odd in ResearchGate, and there's also 200 and some odd probably in Google Scholar. So they'll give you higher indices, but usually when you're writing things, you use Scopus because it's so Google Scholar gives me there it is, an H-index of 63. And your H-index is the number of articles that have been cited that number of times, so it's where it intersects. So I have 63 articles that have been cited at least 63 times, and your I-10 index is how many articles you have that have been cited 10 or more times, right? So they're always higher. Your metrics are higher if you look in Google. So that's why people often say what their Google Scholar metrics are, or their ResearchGate metrics, which are going to be quite a bit higher. So let's take a look and see what they are, actually. It tells me. But it does do it eventually. Okay, so Publons, this here has all your reviews on it, right? So here's a bunch of reviews I've done that are in there, and it tells you the date, you know, what the manuscript is, what journal, and then if it's published, this is kind of neat, it gives you the altimetrics. So these are metrics on publications. So this one here has an altimetric score of 10, which looks at basically like where it's showing up in the media. Right, so the summary is, it's got, you know, it'll tell you who's reading it. Oh, Mendeley, I didn't even get into Mendeley. That's another one that does it. You know, so it'll tell you what's happened with this article on Twitter, the exact tweets that have mentioned this article, what's happened on Facebook with this article. And it'll give you summary. This one has 16 tweets and one Facebook page, 43 readers on Mendeley, so it gets this altimetric score of 10. And it tells you right here it's in the top 25% of all research outputs. So Publons does that. It shows you of the ones you reviewed what their altimetric score is and stuff, which is kind of cool. And then you can do regular reviewers and also as an editor. Let me see, where's mine?
So that includes ones that you recommend to not publish as well as ones that you recommend.
They put it, so Psycho-Oncology just uploads yours all for you automatically, right?
Okay.
So I know it includes ones that don't even get published. So the ones that are grayed out never got published.
Oh, okay.
So it actually helps you as a reviewer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they don't even ask. Psycho-Oncology just dumps yours in there now. And so all the APA journals are going to start dumping.
So then people can go and look up, like, I rejected my
Yeah,
paper.
who wrote that review?
Yeah.
Just be careful when you
Better
write
be
reviews.
nice.
So what else was I going to do? Twitter. There's Twitter. So let's see what's happening on Twitter. My notifications. Oh, I usually avoid politics, but yeah, sometimes I can't help myself.
Fair.
But you can, the neat thing about Twitter is you can also, if you go to your profile, you can look at your stats on here, and this is really neat just to see what happens when you tweet, right? So this is like all the last few weeks, and this shows you how many impressions, so how many people looked at your tweets, and you see this big spike. So what was then? Friday, May 25th and Saturday, May 26th. Right? So I had 19 tweets and got like all these, like almost 9,000 impressions and 11 tweets that day. Right?
Wow.
Yeah, so you can see that's what happens anytime I go to a conference. I don't know what I posted this day. I had 2 tweets and people really liked it. So I could probably click on it, although I never do. I don't know if you can. And see what it is that people are responding to. And then you can do your top tweets. So this gives you your top tweets, I think, over the last month or something. So the most popular one was about that qualitative paper in Psycho-Oncology on the AYAs, right? And the next one was I was making fun of medical people with the PROs.
That one was great.
Yeah, well, look, I got 35 likes, 13 look at detail expand, 16. That's crazy, right? So impressions and total engagements. It tells you all this stuff, right? It's quite crazy. Yeah, so you can, if you want, go in and see, well, what are the popular tweets? What do people seem to like? All this kind of stuff. And then you can look at, if you want to get more followers, like I don't have a ton of followers. I've got 2,600 followers, right? But the key is, if you ever look at anybody's profile, they're usually following about the same number that of followers. So if someone has 1 million followers, they usually follow 1 million people.
Right.
So the best way to get followers is to follow people, right? You know, and the other way is to keep producing content that's interesting. Anyway, I guess I shall leave it at that. Any other questions? Yeah, Mendeley is another one that people are using. It's just never ending. And academia.edu is almost exactly the same as ResearchGate, just not quite as popular. Yeah, so I went through LinkedIn, ResearchGate, I didn't go through Academia, Publins, Google Scholar. Oh, and the Facebook page. So I also have a Facebook page for mindfulness-based cancer recovery. Actually, I have two, but I haven't been using the match one. And so you can say the same thing on here, right? So I post things related to mindfulness and cancer. I follow a number of pages. Just trying to see what I've been posting. So I've got a thing on my TED Talk, you know, and the latest thing I posted was the ASCO guidelines. You know, prior to that. And the neat thing about this is it actually tells you, so 373 people were reached by this. So it tells you all your stats. It's kind of cool. You can spend a lot of time doing it. I try not to. All right, that's it.
I have a question about the final reports.
Yes.
They're due at the end of June, but isn't the program technically going to the end of August?
It is. So you have till the end of August to spend your money.
Okay.
But I think most people have. So I'm trying to get the mentors all together by the end of June to make any changes we want to make, because I want to get the applications out for this year. So there's a bit of overlap, right? Because this year's applications I want to have in by the end of July, so that we can review them in August and then have acceptances by the end of August. So we start in September, right? Yeah. So that's sort of the overlap that's going on. So yeah.
You don't have to spend by the end of June.
No, you can have until the end of August. So I think what we'll do for the time frame, it's always going to be September to August for spending the money.
Right.
But in terms of applying for the next year, that's got to happen by the end of July if you're going to apply for next year. And so that's why we need the reports in by the end of June.
So then if we plan to do anything over July and August, just to indicate that.
Yeah.
In that June report.
Yeah, just say, you know, I'm still going to spend the rest of my money on this, that, or the other.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think most of the conferences are done, right? Like, has anyone else got conferences?
If you have a conference money spent, there's one like the stats training that was a possibility. But,
Yeah.
For the analysis factor, the next workshop they have isn't until October, but you can register in this. It's in summer 2018.
Well, if you could pay in the summer, then I think we're good.
Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah.
thinking, although it hasn't technically opened.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Like, if you have money you haven't used, and if you can pay it
Yeah.
By the end of your term, even if it doesn't happen until later, I think we're good with that. Yeah, spend it. Spend the money. Spend the CIHR money.